everyone. Welcome back to 30, Wordy, and Friendship. My name is Whitney Ensom.
And I'm Alia Bogdanoff.
And I'm back.
Whitney's back. If you tuned in last week, you heard that Whitney was actually in, where were you again? I'm sorry, I'm going to mess it up.
Iceland and England for about 11 days, and it was amazing. And back to reality.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to be back to talk about boundaries today.
I missed you so much.
Oh, I missed you too.
You came back and I was like, come back now.
Do the episode with me. Yes.
So we're squeezing this in on an early morning because our lives are so hectic.
Yes.
But we care about this project so much,
do.
so we want to keep going.
Yep. Yeah, so we're talking about boundaries, and so we're going to talk about what boundaries are for us and why we need them. Mm-hmm. Would you like to start, Alia? Start us off?
So why do we need boundaries? Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about before my life had boundaries. Mm-hmm. Before boundaries, I had absolutely no structure for my relationships. Mm-hmm. They were all based on how I was feeling, how the other person was feeling. A lot of it was based off of my family dynamic that I grew up with. Mm-hmm. And I just felt like all my relationships got really messy really fast. Mm-hmm. And I never understood why I couldn't keep friends. Yeah. I mean, I could have them, but I would eventually stop enjoying them. Mm. And it wasn't until I learned about boundaries and about setting these expectations and communicating what I needed in the relationship, communicating. When a friend had injured me or crossed over something, and I learned about these boundaries and even the idea of saying no, because I was just such a yes person. I thought a friendship was please the other person as much as possible so they never leave you. Like that was my definition. Yeah. And so when I learned about boundaries and realizing, okay, I have to communicate with this person when they step on me and when they injure me or when they say something or do something that makes me uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And I have to communicate in a way that is calm and effective, not dramatic and like, this friendship's over because you hurt me, like I'm offended. Mm-hmm. And so before we get to offense and before we get to a point where a friendship has to end because there's been way too many missed opportunities for communication and people are just hurt now. Mm-hmm. Boundaries come into play and we have to learn how to talk about what's not okay with us or what's not okay for us to be, how to be treated, I guess you could say, or how we want this relationship to look.
I love that. How do I want this relationship to look? So I feel like boundaries have saved me. It's been a process for me over the years. Starting early 20s, I had someone in my life encourage me strongly to develop them. And it took a while to figure that out, what that meant for me. Therapy really helped. But I think the biggest part for boundaries, like you said, Alia, is like saying no. That I always say this, I'm a recovering people pleaser. And I just found that I still find that if I don't say no when I know that I don't want something, say to be there for someone when I'm needing to take care of myself, to communicating with or maybe being around people who are a little more negative and kind of letting that suck the life out of me and how to separate myself, that it's okay to say no and to create that boundary. And I think that's difficult as a people pleaser because I feel like I want people to like me and to say no, I was afraid of what that would do. Yeah. And I found that when I didn't say no, I was resentful. Yeah. And I was mean and I was not happy about it and I was passive aggressive, and like our communication episode, that was kind of my go-to. So I think that I talked about the worthiness that I've developed, that self-worthiness, that I'm worthy enough to say no, and that my relationships are healthier when I have that balance and when I create that space for myself. And I also was a sharer. I would just share anything with anyone. And then I kind of went from, I read online, it's like porous, think of like little holes where everything just kind of flows through, to very rigid. And that's something I've been coming away from, which is you don't tell people things because who knows how they're going to react. And kind of just closed up. And then slowly in the last few years, I've been learning how to have healthy boundaries where certain people know certain things and certain people just don't. And it's not that I don't love them. It's not that I don't like them. But I really need those different levels of relationships where I know, like we talked about before, how can we test those and see if that person is trustworthy enough. So it's really helpful for me, and it actually is benefiting my relationships professionally, personally, in my family, with my friends. It's absolutely necessary. So I'm a big fan of boundaries.
Well, I think about it like, how do you get, I used to think of it as like, how do I get my way? Like, I am trying to get something out of this relationship. I'm trying to give it direction. I'm trying to get my way in this situation. The only other way I knew how to do that was to be manipulative. And usually it's like passive aggressive. Like I would undertone suggest things.
You don't have to do that.
I would do this thing where, and my friends who know me probably know I still do this sometimes, and they laugh because they're like, what do you want to do? And you know, it's like, well, I don't know. What do you want to do? And they're like, I'm not really sure. And I'm like, we could maybe go here for 5 minutes, then go here for 10 minutes, then eat, then go here, then do. And I like literally lay out this whole plan. It's very, very rigid. And then I'm like, but I mean, or we could do what you want. I mean, like, and I try to come off, I think because I'm very direct with what I want. And I know what I want all the time. I know what I want to do. It is very annoying. And if I'm not relaxed, I can be really controlling and like going after it. So what I do sometimes is I try to take my plan and then present it very passively. Like, I don't care, but I really care really hard. And so what I've learned to do, my boundaries that I've learned is to say like, hey, this is what I would really like to do, but I'm trying to be flexible with my plan. So it's presenting it in a way that's healthier, and communicating with the other person, because otherwise what I'm doing is I'm asking the other person to be very confused about what I want and to probably disappoint me. And then I'm going to have to try to control even more. So when did you realize that you needed boundaries, Whitney?
So I was 21, and
you're the exact.
Oh, absolutely.
June 1st.
It was at a very difficult point in my life, and so some of my family, actually, shout out to my dad, and some really difficult things have been happening in my life, and life was really confusing. And I shared with a lot of people what was going on in my life, and in maybe unhealthy ways, and it was just a lot of chaos. Early 20s were really, really difficult for me. And I remember him telling me, hey, you need some boundaries. I'm like, what's that? And then I started going to therapy, and I was like, oh, I get that now.
Yeah.
And I really learned that not everybody needed to know everything. And again, that passive aggressiveness, I don't know where that came from. I think, nature, nurture, all that. But it was kind of just my go-to way, like you were saying earlier. I mean, I don't really need to do. And I found recently, though, when I went on my trip with my friend, and we were talking about that flexibility, and there were times where, so I was with my family too, and one day I was like, hey, today I don't want to do that. Let's just do this. And my friend's like, I'm really proud of you for doing that. And so I look at that I'm 32, so the last long time, math.
11 years?
12
Was that 11, 12 years?
11 years.
Yes.
7:30 in the morning. 11 years of growth where I'm like, now I can say no thank you in a loving, kind way. But it was, I'm really grateful that people in my life saw the struggle and really called me up to living in a healthier way. So.
You are really, I have to say, I have to give you a shout out. You are really good at boundaries, and it surprises me, but also like encourages me, because you'll say stuff like, I really don't want to do that this way. And we've had to do that a lot with this podcast because in the beginning we had to really figure out what kind of direction we wanted to take, where we wanted to see. And the first time I presented an idea and you said, I don't really like that idea. I was like, she just straight up told me no. but I don't feel rejected.
No.
Or my idea doesn't feel bad. I just felt like, oh, we're allowed to say that? And then it was like, oh, bring it on. Tell me what you want to do. I'll shoot it down. I'm just kidding. But like, I'm ready to be honest, because I think that we get so sensitive about stepping on people's toes.
Yes, we do.
That we try to present everything in such a positive light. Like, if you don't, like, I can relate to this a lot when I used to work, and people would present an idea, and it was like, I mean, maybe we could just, like, you try to just, like, withdraw,
right,
and then come around and say, and I think it's actually, I've learned it's more helpful to just tell somebody, that's really a really good input, and I really love that you came up with that and that you're bringing that to the table.
Right.
But let's talk a little bit about why it might not work, and I'm going to give you a couple of reasons, and then let's take your idea and let's work on it, and not shoot people down or like put up this huge wall where they can't, where they're shut down, but invite them into an honest conversation. So I think I've learned over the years that's what we have to do with boundaries to improve our communication.
Absolutely. We need it, and the people in our lives need it.
Yeah.
Because so much gets lost if we don't communicate. And that person's like, why are you mad? And you're like, well, I really needed the, and why didn't you just tell me? And that disappointment, it might happen. There might be people who are like, you shot me down. I'm kind of upset about that.
Yeah.
And those are the people I don't know if I would want in my inner circle. I want somebody who's willing to be flexible too in my life. And I think when we're healthier, we choose healthier people in our lives. And if someone doesn't necessarily have as great a boundaries, because I've been that person, and gosh, there's been times recently, I won't go into it and it'll take forever on this podcast, but times where I totally messed up with it, or I didn't do it the way I look back and I'm thinking, I really didn't ask for what I needed at that point. And we really need that communication with each other, and we can model that for other people in our lives.
By being comfortable when we ask. It's really hard to be very comfortable and say to somebody with a straight face, calmly, I need to have, I think a lot of times it starts in a romantic relationship because you realize that it's the first relationship that you're potentially committing to for a long period of time. And the drama just doesn't work. Friends kind of come and go, but you are thinking, okay, I need to create a foundation for this relationship because it needs to have a healthy roots. For sure. And I remember with Voss, early on telling him things and him not understanding. He's never had anybody communicate with him like that, and saying, I need you to, we had a big issue in the beginning. It sounds really stupid, but he could not be on time. I'm not talking about 5 minutes. I'm talking about being an hour and a half late and not calling me to tell me, or picking up the phone when I called him, because he used to ride a motorcycle when we were dating.
Yes.
What? Yeah.
What?
And he also lived 45 minutes from my house. And so for 45 minutes, he didn't answer the phone. I had no idea where he was. And I can't tell you how many times I got ready, and the family, my Brookville family that I lived with, would just watch me sitting on the couch like, when are you supposed to leave? And I was like, an hour ago. Where's Voss? And I'm like, I don't know. And he would legit run into people. He ran into his dad on the freeway once, pulled off, and had coffee with him for like an hour. Didn't call to tell me, didn't answer the phone. So I thought he was dead. And there's a point when you're waiting for a man where you go from angry to concern.
Right.
And then when they do show up and they're not dead, back to angry. So that was a huge issue with us in the beginning, is he was so bad at regulating time. He gave himself no buffer time. And so I had to sit him down and say, look, in order for this relationship to work, I know this is a very cute thing that you do, and I know I'm a very on-time person, and it irritates me to the nine. I said, but you need to understand that when you tell me you're going to be somewhere, it's part of my trust for you. It's part of my ability to know you're going to be there for me when you show up on time and when you're honest.
Yes.
He never wanted to disappoint me, so if he knew he was getting off work late, he didn't want to have to tell me it's going to be another hour, so he would tell me I'll be there in 15 minutes and then still show up an hour later. He had a really hard time communicating disappointment, so I had to set a boundary with him and say, like, I need you to be better at communicating with me, and I need you to disappoint me verbally so that you don't have to deal with the aftermath of
My
me in person.
Why are you late again? I thought you were dead on the freeway.
Oh, I seriously did. So
Yes. Well, it's good to have that in in all of our relationships. Yes. So, who have we needed? Yeah. Who do we need boundaries with? And who needs them? Everybody needs them.
everybody, that's the answer.
I'm just laughing because we wrote that and we're like, everybody. Everybody needs them.
And every relationship needs them.
Every relationship.
No relationship can survive without some form of boundaries.
Yep.
And if you think you have one that's surviving without them, it's probably a family member or best friend. And I'm going to tell you, there are plenty of things under the surface that are not working.
Right.
Family, I think, is the easiest to survive without them because we already have this known structure, but they're not healthy.
No.
I would say with my family, something I've been practicing slowly on each person, and I'm not even to some of the other ones yet, is being honest.
Yeah.
You get so used to just kind of telling a family member what they want to hear because you want them to be happy with you, or you know that keeping the peace, you're like, I got to keep the peace. In my family, when people fight, they separate.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. Like, I can't tell you how many squabbles end in family members not speaking to each other for years. And when you know that in the back of your head, like, if I rock this boat too hard, this person will refuse to speak to me for a period of time. I've had, minor arguments that lasted in 6 months of that person just being like, I refuse to even talk to you. And so there's this fear in me that if I rock the boat, people will leave, because I've experienced it so many times. So it was hard for me at first to put up boundaries in my life because I thought they were roadblocks for people being close to me, but they're not. They're maps for people to get to you and to get to you the right way.
Yes. I think families, we're with them. I mean, depends on our relationships with them, but we grow up with them, and I think all of our relationships look different with our family. But I think for me, it's been there's been times of that not communicating, and it has stemmed from somebody not asking for what they need, or maybe not communicating. Recently, last year, situation in my family where something was upsetting to me, and instead of communicating it effectively, anyway, it just basically this thing lasted for 3 months, and finally at Thanksgiving, I was like, yo, this is what my issue was. This person said, I'm really glad that you told me this. This is where I was coming from. And I really could have saved a lot of stress and separation of communicating with them. And I think that they're the people who have seen the ugliness of us over the years. Yeah. My sisters, my parents, bless them. And we've all kind of let things happen unhealthily. I don't know.
Did you just make up that word?
I just made it up. I don't know. But I think that that's some of the hardest boundaries I've had to make. And I think for me especially, I have certain boundaries with time because of how introverted I am. And I remember in my mid-20s, my therapist was like, okay, Whitney, so what you can do is next time you're with your family, I know you love them, but you get a little bit overwhelmed. You can limit the amount of time you're at that house doing that thing. That's McCoy. You can limit what you're doing and the time that you're spending, and then sort of decide when you want to leave, and let that be your truth and what you want to do. So I think the boundaries I've had to do recently with friends is, well, with you and others of with some friends, it's this is the amount of time I have to spend.
Yeah, you told me that yesterday when you were like, which I loved. You're like, I can only function until this time
in the evening.
And we were trying to get together to do this, and And that was really good for me because I was trying to just like slab a bunch of things together. And so what happened is she communicated that she needed to leave for a certain time. And I was trying to make this time frame work. And there came a point where I had to realize that I was trying to fit so much. And I was actually stepping over your boundaries because I was like thinking, yeah, she's saying that, but whatever happens is going to happen. And she's just going to have to be more flexible. And then I had to realize that like it just wasn't going to work. No. And I was trying to make something happen. And I think from the beginning, I needed to communicate it wasn't going to work. But see, that's what I do. I get very sensitive. I don't like to hurt people's feelings, or I don't like to tell people no. So in the end, we just decided that last night would not work, and we rescheduled for early this morning.
And now our brains are a little bit jumbled.
Yes, it's so early.
It's so early. And we realized, we paused, that we were talking earlier before the episode started, and there's a level of honesty we have with each other about our relationships, and we're being very vague, at least for me especially, because I want to maintain some confidentiality of the people in my life. So it sounds really weird sometimes and forced, but I think really for me, just kind of finish up the friend thing, is just, it's taken time to figure out what works best and how to say no when needed and how to prioritize me and decide who I can trust in order to share this information, and that it takes time to, these are things we talked about before, where it just takes time to build those relationships with where we can trust that person. And so it's really important to have those in all of our relationships, romantic, friends, family, and I've noticed at my work too of when do I need to kind of walk away, and when do I need me time, and which people do I am I closer to, and which ones am I not, and it's okay if I'm not. And so I don't know,
because a lot of it has to do with spending time with people.
It does.
I think now that I don't work, I spend a lot of time with people, which is very different for me, because when I worked, I had friends that never saw me. And now I feel like I get text messages all the time like, hey, we should hang out, and I'm like totally for it. I love it. I send them too. But a lot of times what happens to me is I'll get too many in 1 week, and then I'm trying to fit this person on Monday, this person on Wednesday, this person. And what happens is I realize I have no rest days, or I have no rest periods, or I have no time to do the other tasks that I need to accomplish. But I want to accommodate everybody. I don't want to have to tell people okay, how's November for you when we're in like September, you know, right? We do that. So and we joke, Whitney and I have joked of like, I'm getting too many friends. And that's not to say like, oh my God, I'm so popular. It's not that. It's that we are very conscious of the time that we spend with people. And when I have a friend, I like to spend time with them. At least, I think in my brain it's like once a week if they're a close friend. I want to see them once a week. And sometimes that doesn't work. No. It's hard when you're older to have these relationships where you see people once a month. Like, how do you have a close relationship that you see once a month? But that ends up being that's reality. And, okay, really quick, I'm going to shift. So I have a good story for what happens when you don't have boundaries. I had a recent... Life falls apart. So I am really bad at nipping it in the bud. Bud or butt?
Bud?
I'm nipping it in the bud.
I don't know.
I'm a butt about this. When I feel something, I'm really bad about convincing myself that it's time to say something. I need like an alarm to go off in my head. So I met a gal at a park, just randomly. We were both watching our kids. She had kids a little bit older than mine, and she was like, we were just talking, and we were just laughing, having a grand old time, and we were talking about everything, faith, politics, and we realized we had absolutely nothing in common. Like, we didn't believe any of the same ways. She was like, I don't believe in God, and she was like a liberal from Portland, and that's like totally opposite of me. But we had this great connection.
There's nothing wrong with liberals from Portland.
Side note, liberals from Portland are great too.
We
but
accept you.
It's very different from me. But we just had this great understanding about us and this great connection, and we had a great conversation. So she was like, we should hang out sometime. So I gave her my phone number, and she texted me, and we met up. And I was so excited about this new friend. I was like telling everyone, like, I met this new friend. And I was just super stoked about this new relationship. And we went for coffee, and we had this great time. And we had this freedom about us. We just talk about anything. And then afterwards, I was feeling really tired because we had my kids with us. Her kids were in school. And I was like, okay, this is good. I did my hangout for 2 hours. And then she said the crucial words, do you want to go back to my house and keep hanging out? And I knew I was done for the day, and I was tired, and I had 2 littles with me, and I said yes. So then we go back to her house, and everything started to go downhill. So we sit down, and I'm like, okay, we'll talk for like 15 minutes. I'll get out. She starts telling me some really creepy stuff about herself.
Oh dear.
And she starts, porous is the word you used earlier, porosing all over me. And she's like telling me how she can solve murders because she speaks to dead people, and that she's part witch. And if you know me, that stuff freaks me out.
Yeah.
And she starts telling me that, just the stuff you don't tell your closest friend until you've known them for 10 years. Yeah. And she starts telling me about how she can see devils in her home. And just like, again, what? I just met this person. She went on for almost 3 hours about her spiritual abilities, but then also continued to say like how she was the smartest person she knew. She's also very self-confident is the word that we're going to use, and how it went on and on and on, and I think I sat there and just nodded for 3 hours. And then I was totally worn out, and it was just totally it was way too much. It was way too much.
Yeah.
Okay, so I went home. What I should have done is I should have told her, like, hey, enjoyed coffee with you, but that second part of our conversation was a bit much for me. We just met. No, instead, she contacted me again, and I said, yeah, we'll hang out sometime soon, maybe someday. And then I just kind of ghosted her for a little bit. Now, I didn't not respond to her, but I didn't make any plans. And anytime she brought up plans, I avoided plans. And then like a month went by, and she just texted me out of the blue and was like, hey, so what's going on? Why aren't we friends anymore? And did I come on, like, was I too much? And I finally decided to be honest with her. I said, you were too much. And you know what was wrong with what happened is I just met you, and you told me things that you should tell somebody that you've known for 20 years, you know? So that's what I had to do.
Man.
Is I had to be honest with her, and she didn't like it. But I would say I did a good job with boundaries at the end. The problem was, because I didn't create boundaries sooner, because even in the conversation I didn't create boundaries, because I didn't tell her the day we met, the very first time, that I was tired and I needed to go home. That was my first missed boundary that day, and then I had like 20 more. Because I didn't, while we were at her house, say, hey, I'm getting a little, I need to get going, because I didn't do any of those things. What I did is I had to have I just basically behaved badly. Yeah. And in the end, it was kind of my fault. She was strange, but that's okay. People are strange. But it was my fault, because what I did is she kept asking me while she was telling me this, like, man, am I being really weird? I thought this was too much. And, I was like, no, tell me more about your creepy self. And I just kept going. I kept being so permissive. But what was really happening inside of me is I was saying to myself, you are never, ever seeing this person again. This person is way too much. And you are never doing this again. This is torture. So I put myself in a torturous situation. I allowed myself to be there. I didn't say anything. And then my only option after that was to leave. Because there was no fixing it by that point. I had already made all these opinions about her. And then, of course, I avoided her. She was hurt. And then in the end, we had a decent conversation. And I just told her that, I said, she had made lots of comments about how she had no friends. And I said, maybe it's because you don't know how to have friendships, and because you scare people away with some of the things you tell. I mean, it's like if I met you the first time and I was like, hey, let me tell you the deepest, darkest secret of my life. Yeah, you're going to scare people. Yes. So anyways, but I count that as a failure for me, because I didn't have any boundaries with her.
Growth. Opportunity for growth.
Opportunity for growth. Next time somebody is really weird, I'm going to tell them.
You just got to say no to weird people.
Okay, Whitney. If somebody is listening to this and they recognize that they have no boundaries,
yes,
none whatsoever, and they relate to a lot of the stuff we talked about, where do they start?
So on our YouTube, so I found these cool worksheets, good explanation of boundaries. Like, you know, we have physical boundaries, emotional boundaries, material boundaries. Are we loaning people money that we shouldn't be loaning money to? And the biggest one for me is the time boundary. So there's these cool things I found online, and we're going to post them with the video.
Sure.
But I think, you know, the important thing is to start evaluating and realizing where we have allowed people to,
Yes,
that's the key. We have allowed people to overstep those boundaries.
Yes.
And maybe we don't have any. Maybe we're a type of person who likes to share things with people we've just met. Maybe we're feeling uncomfortable with it. And maybe we're noticing that people aren't responding like we hope they would, and that we're weirding them out and we don't know why.
Yeah.
Really evaluating and saying, who in my life needs to know this, gets to know this, will know what to do with it when I say it, can hold that with me. And, you know, I don't know, maybe it's just that I was aware of it. But knowing something's not right. I think we can feel that incongruence in ourselves and say, I don't feel like I leave this interaction feeling like Brene would say a vulnerability hangover, where we're feeling like this didn't go the way I thought it would. For whatever reason, if we are seeing that something's not working with our boundaries, really taking a look at what's not working with who, in what setting, and being honest, because you and I have done that, and we know how hard it is to do that, but how rewarding it is, how great our relationships get to be after. Though they have their ups and downs, we know what we need. So I don't know. I think those of you who are listening through YouTube can click on those links. I think they'll be helpful. But really just doing that self-evaluation. And it's hard and it's uncomfortable, possibly for us, but how cool if we get to have healthier relationships moving forward now with our families, with our partners, with our friends, with our coworkers, with people, with random weird people we meet at the park, and knowing who we are and what we need, and then kind of working around that and saying, this is what works for me and this is what doesn't. And we can do those in loving ways. We're not shutting people down. We can do it in a way that's calm and kind and coming from a place of worthiness. And
and I think I would say start somewhere. Pick something you can comfortably communicate with people. Like if you're somebody who has a problem with donating your time way too often and wearing yourself out, say to yourself, you know what, from this point on, I am going, when I feel that twinge inside of myself that I'm stressing myself out, I am going to be clear with others. You know, Tuesday is actually not going to work for me because I know myself and I know I need a certain amount of time to recover from the long weekend or whatnot. I'm going to start doing that. Or if you know, for me, my husband confronted me about this. I tell everybody everything. And he came to me one day and was like, okay, so that was fine when you were single and all the divulging you were doing was about your life. But now we're married and together, and now when you divulge, it's about my life. And he is, what was the other word you used? Not porous. The other one. He's the most rigid person in the world when it comes to information. I think he thinks he works for the CIA, and that's his family, his whole family. If you try to say like anything about them, they get so annoyed with me because I'm like, why is it so important that nobody knows anything about you? Why can't you just tell me? Why can't you they all keep secret. It's their family dynamic. And so my husband confronted me about my inability to respect his boundaries. And he asked that I know in my heart when I'm just talking and telling somebody everything about myself, and it's completely unnecessary. So sometimes he'll ask me, like, if it's really important, you need to talk about it, maybe pick 2 trustworthy friends. Let's not tell everybody we see today about that really crucial thing that happened to us yesterday. Let's keep some things just between us. And I just had a field day with that one. But that was something that I had to choose to work on.
So starting somewhere with one person, it might feel overwhelming to change a lot of relationships. But if we can start with one person and say, this is what's going to work for me this week. I love you. I want to hang out with you, but Tuesday's not a good day.
Yeah.
How about next week?
And build that muscle, as I always say. If you don't know how to do it, you got to build a muscle. You got to build it. You got to use it to build it.
They're not going to know maybe what to do with it at first. And that's okay, because they're not used to that with you. But keep leaning into it. It'll happen, and your relationships will be richer because of it. We're excited to talk about this and be real. And we've come from backgrounds, and we are doing it now in our 30s, and it's hard, but it's worth it, and
it's so worth it.
Happy to share that with you guys. So thanks again for listening about boundaries.
Have a great week, and give us your feedback if you have any thoughts.
See you next time on 30, Wordy, and Friendship.